watching Property TV.
Hello and welcome to Property Summits, the must-watch show for property investors and developers alike. I'm Emma Birchly, and with me today are not 5 but 6 experts at the top of their game. First off, our newest member, Ranjan Bhattacharya. He's an investor, YouTuber, mentor and all-round authority when it comes to the world of property. So too is Nicholas Wallwork, a seasoned property developer, investor and author, as well as being CEO of the world's largest international property forum. Richard Bush joins us too, a man who turned a personal interest in crowdfunding and peer-to-peer lending into a professional passion, co-founding Crowdlords. Also here is John Howard, having bought and sold more than 3,500 houses, apartments and developments in the UK. He's certainly been there and done it and isn't afraid of sharing what he's learned along the way. Now, Paul Mahoney is joining us too. Best-selling author and serial entrepreneur, he founded Nova Financial Group, providing property investment advice with a particular focus on the buy-to-let sector. And last, but most certainly not least, is Tony Gimple, a man with 40 years in the business. He's a leading advisor when it comes to tax planning. Hello, gentlemen. Nice to see you all.
Hi.
So, the high street, we know that it's changed a lot, hasn't it? Ranjan, what do you think it could look like come 2030?
I think it's a fantastic question because I think there's a lot of talk about it dying. If you look at a lot of the media, they talk about it dying. And I don't think it's dying, it's transforming. And the question is what it's transforming to and how can property investors profit from that transformation? And I think it's transforming from a place where people have bought stuff to a place where people do stuff. You don't need to buy stuff on the high street, it's all going to get delivered. That's going to accelerate. There's also the death of cash, which has got accelerated during COVID. You don't need the banks anymore. You know, well before 2030, most, if not all, high street banks are going to shut down. And you know, I'll make a little prediction. I think by 2030, the amount of these convenience stores we have on the high streets will go down as well. The Tesco Metros, the Sainsbury's Locals, and the co-ops, and all of that. You know, because we've got these sort of places don't need to be in high street locations. They can be in off high street locations. They're already trialling autonomous deliveries and all of that. You'll be able to order your tea or milk and have it delivered in an hour. Couple that with AI, you know, where they know that how much milk every household is buying a week. It's quite easy then to make sure the right amount of inventory is in those off high street locations to deliver those regular shopping items to households. So I see the high street changing from a place where people have bought stuff to a place where people do stuff.
So this is not going and buying a new pair of trousers,
no,
but it's going to have your hair cut, because you can't buy a haircut on the internet.
You can't cut your hair on the internet.
Unless you're, of course, unless you're Nicholas, who has his own clippers and does it himself, it turns out.
Yeah. I think that tells us everything we want to know about Nicholas Wallwork, if you don't mind me saying.
He just can't afford it.
No, unbelievable.
No,
tricky.
Since I came off the street and been living in one of John's hostels, the rent's so bloody high, I can't do anything. So,
anyway, back to the point. Back to the point. We're not buying stuff on the high street. We're doing stuff, experiences.
But it's different stuff as well. I think the days of the chain and the sort of identikit type of high street. I'm not talking about shopping malls, by the way. Those I think will remain. Those destination type of centres that we've still got, because a lot of these brands still need showcase places to show stuff. I'm talking about the regular high street where you walk up and down. I think there's no need for those sort of chains to be represented there. They've shut down at an alarming rate. The amount of stores that shut down during the COVID lockdown year was more than in any other year in the previous 30 years. But what very few of the media outlets actually pointed out was 17,000 stores actually opened up in 2021. And those weren't set stores that were typically selling products, they were offering experiences. So even we've got a tenant in one of our commercial properties, they've opened up what they call a tap room. And I wasn't really that familiar with these sort of things. They're places where people experience specialty beers, but they're like pubs, but they're more boutique. They're on a micro level as opposed to national chain of places where you get all the branded beers and that kind of stuff.
It's unique experiences.
It's unique experiences. It's more catered for the local sort of environment. And as people want to do stuff on the high street, more and more people will want to live on the high street because there's a surplus of space. And thanks to various permitted development rules, they're now able to be repurposed. I think there's two things that the government have done which have been fantastic. One is the permitted development that allows unused commercial spaces to be repurposed to residential. But there's also repurposing commercial to commercial. If you get a bank building and you wanted to make a restaurant, you'd used to have to apply for planning permission and it'd probably be refused. Now, thanks to changes and they all becoming part of usage class E, you can repurpose an office to a restaurant to a retail store to a gym. You can do all of that without applying for a planning permission.
Banks work really well, don't they, actually, with bars and restaurants, because they're quite imposing buildings often.
They're in the centre of the pitch, and they're imposing buildings. They look attractive. They're absolutely ideal for that sort of repurposing, yeah.
One of the problems I've had with, and by the way, what Ranjan said, I totally agree with you, Ranjan. Couple of things. One, I found that we've got some empty space at the moment, and where we could get a national tenant to go in them and spend 200,000 fitting it out. At the moment, I can't get national tenants to go in. I can only get local tenants to go in. Of course, they won't spend the money to fit it out, so I'm going to have to fit them out, which is a burden to me. The high street rents have gone down by half. Anything in the high street, if it comes vacant or if the tenant comes to the rent review and it's not an upward only rent review, they're halving the rent, and some are going down 2/3.
You say they're halving the rent, the
That's
tenant is
the
saying,
tenant saying,
we
if you
can
want
only
me to
afford.
stay, that's what I'm going to pay. But what I would say is that high streets are not dead. You know, we've got a number of tenants going into high street locations that we own, but at a lot less rent, a rent that they can afford to make it work for them. And that's important, because up till, until COVID came, they were paying far too much rent. And most of the companies that have disappeared were always going to disappear. They've just disappeared quicker because of what's happened with COVID and everything else. They were always weak businesses. And that's what happens when you have turbulence, is that, the weaker ones go to and new ones come up. And that's what's happening now.
And how many opportunities are there, or how much opportunity is there now for someone with an idea who wants to set up their own little business on the high street, knowing that the rents are less?
Well, what I would say is 10 years ago, they would have no chance of getting on the high street. Not of these smaller business, and we wouldn't be in a position to be able to buy anything on the high street because all the companies that were buying these investments on the high street were pension companies at 4 or 5% yields. Now a local tenant can get on the high street, which is a great opportunity for them, and we're able to buy on the high street, which we were never able to do till now.
Can I just comment on something you said about the rents? I think it's a very micro markets across the UK. There are areas where commercial rents, and particularly shop rents, have fallen dramatically. And I think with repurposing, by the way, it's going to be a mixed market across the UK.
Sure.
Because there are areas where developers like us will enter the space and do it because the land values make sense. But there are areas up north where the land values don't make sense. The conversion and the compliance with building regulations and energy efficiency and all of that make the building work uneconomic. So the government will have to help those areas be repurposed, but they don't have to in the more prosperous areas.
But Ranjan, they have done, because of the town fund, which is 25 million to 117 towns in the UK. They are trying to level up, and the great thing there is that on the back of that, or back of the town funds and the spending 25 million in that town, an investor can come in on the back of that and benefit from all that uplift that's happened in that area. So that's really good.
I mean, the point I was trying to make on the rents is that we're dealing in particular areas at the moment in the southeast of England where they're in prosperous footfall areas, and the local authorities have always resisted restaurantification.
Right.
And now, thanks to Class E, they can't.
Yeah.
So what is happening is that you can pick up former bank buildings and get restaurant operators in there and actually get an increase on the rent. simply because they want that pitch and they could never get in that area before. Now, I think there's first mover opportunities in all the markets across the UK. It's just figuring out what they are, but it's on a local level, I think.
You are watching Property TV. You are watching Property TV.
I'm thinking about the fact that lots of people are working from home, even though we're kind of on the tail end of the pandemic. It's fundamentally shifted, hasn't it, the way lots of people work. Forgetting the big town centres, but if you think of like the smaller community high streets, has that changed things? Because maybe people aren't going to London or wherever it might be and getting their coffee from a big chain, but they want to pop out at lunchtime and go to a local cafe, for example.
Yeah, I think it's changing the footfall in small towns and big cities because people are working from home and not going to the office. But like Ranjan says, that creates opportunity for those spaces to be used and for those people to be served locally. I mean, we're funding a mixed-use development in Braintree, which is a small town. It doesn't have a great footfall, but the first thing to sell were the two commercial spaces on the ground floor. And they were going to small operators as opposed to national chains, and they got a good price for them. So I still think there's good opportunity for people with commercial.
No one can deny, though, that high streets have changed, haven't they, in that in many areas there are loads of charity shops, there are a load of bookies and things like that. Is that going to change, do you think?
It's constantly changing, isn't it?
It's constantly changing,
Isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the bookies is one example of a leisure activity. So will there be more of those? Quite likely, if it falls within the use classes and
It doesn't though. I mean, I think the bookies is something which has gone online for the younger generation, and the older generation are still in there with their cloth cap.
I think the bookies situation is phasing out. They will have them in certain areas, and in certain areas they've got two because the new rules only allow them to have so much of a payout on those cash machines.
Yeah, much lower.
So they now have two in some areas to
Oh,
balance
right,
that.
okay.
But I think on the whole, I think you'll find them more going online.
What about estate agents? Relevant area.
Well, where do we start?
I suppose in some ways I've been involved in a estate agency from pioneering the use of mortgage brokers in them in the mid-80s. People need somewhere to live, whether it's to rent, buy, whether it's to source. So doing it online is one thing, but at the end of the day there's nothing like, and that's why I'm so glad that we've come out of the pandemic and actually meet people for real. To actually meet somebody in the flesh, look them in the eye and go and see something. You can only get, and people say that the camera never lies. Well, of course it lies.
A wide-angle lens is a magical thing for you property developers.
Especially with estate agents.
Crikey, I thought this was vast and you can like barely swing a cat.
Yeah, don't get me on swinging cats, but anyway. So as long as people want a roof over their head, they want somewhere to eat, they want to get cash or a variety of it, then there's still a market for estate agency in a big high street or a small one.
You say that. I mean, we're just opening another estate agency. Would you believe? So we've got 5 in Norfolk. We're opening a 6th one, but actually that's almost because it's an older generation there. If you talk to Paul and Nicholas, what are your thoughts? Because at the end of the day, you're younger than the rest of us, sadly.
Emma excluded.
Well, Paul and I both used to selling investment properties online, right? So we've done that for many years between us. But in terms of homes, I still think certain people don't want to show people around their home. They want a third party to do it for privacy reasons. Yes. And privacy is an all-time high of everyone wanting to protect their privacy online.
You don't need to be coming from an office though, do you, I suppose?
Property is going more and more online, but I think estate agents definitely still have a place on the high street. One of the main things that I stop and look at when I'm on a high street is the properties in the window of an estate agency.
How old-fashioned you are, Paul. How old-fashioned? I thought you'd be flicking it through your phone.
Especially if it's a new area and I don't really know the area, I always stop and have a look at what the prices are and what the rents are and all that
Perhaps
sort of thing.
you're getting old.
I don't usually go in, But still, I think that they do have a place. You know, I've got a personal experience with this. I've got some supplement stores in Australia, so this isn't just a UK thing. We've just shut one of the stores, which was on the high street. We still have the shop, and there's a smash lab going into it now, which is where you go and break things with a baseball bat.
Over.
Get
Serious?
No.
I think John needs to go there and get out some of his tension.
That wouldn't happen in England.
You know, that ties in well with what Ranjan was saying, was this was a shop that, you know, was selling things that can be quite easily bought online now, and more people have been doing that over the pandemic, which is what's made that shop difficult, to going and having an experience in that same location.
Wow.
That's amazing.
I think the resurgence of the internet cafe, which I think died a death in the early noughties, but it's going to come back because the internet cafe will come back as a way of a sort of mini serviced office on the high.
Haven't got to heat your own home. Go and have someone else's heating.
Well, people are working from home. But not everyone has the dining room, the office in the back of the garden, the spare bedroom and all of that.
Yeah.
And you want a separate space sometimes.
Exactly.
You don't want
I
to be
was just
going
in
from one
around
room to the
corner.
other.
There was about 50
Exactly.
people working in the
Really?
cafe just across the road.
And networking, and you know, people like to work with other people. It's very lonely if you're working from home all the time on your own. And I think most people seem to be going into the office a couple of days a week or whatever. Probably is about 2 or 3 days a week. But of course, it's great for the environment. It's great for family life, isn't it? The fact that it's smart time, isn't it?
Let's talk about how the council react to this, though. I mean, the council have got, and we're going to talk on another episode about PD rights and how they're being affected at the moment specifically. But you know, what does the council think of all this happening? These different events coming into the town. You know, they're not usually on board with things. I mean, I'll give you an example. We're developing a site down in Hampshire at the moment that we're doing as a co-living. It's a care home conversion to a co-living block of cluster flats. But there are communal rooms where we're going to have a breakout, kind of like we're just discussing, a coffee workroom.
What the hell's that for?
10 computer terminals.
Oh, I see. Sorry.
Yeah, like a working space, like a serviced office in the block, co-living. So they come and work downstairs in their own, room,
Gotcha.
Probably about half this size with 10 or 15 terminals around it for use for that building. Council don't have a clue. Well, the council don't have a clue. Oh, we don't like that. It's too big. The site's too big. We don't understand it. They still think it's some sort of big HMO,
Interesting.
30 odd people.
The planning rule has always been you're allowed to use one room of your house as an office. That's been the rule for donkey's years. And I remember when I started working from home, I was worried naively because I was using 2 rooms. So, oh dear.
HMRC, how long were you doing that for, John?
Many years.
But it's true, isn't it? The councils are still in the 1980s in terms of
absolutely.
these kind of changes. So
The 1880s.
Pretty much the 1880s.
The 80s
exactly.
were good, weren't they, Ranjan?
Will they catch up? Are they?
He's put you in that class, Ranjan. It's okay.
Will the councils have to catch up, or does it?
They must
They
be
will
aware,
slowly,
mustn't they?
yeah.
Because
It's
I think
just
one of the
there.
other trends is older people moving back into the town centre to live because
Very
it's
much
got
so.
local
Very good
facilities,
point.
and that has to be facilitated with care services locally.
Absolutely. I've just done 2 deals recently with 2 of the big retirement companies. One in Ipswich, they're building 70 units in the town centre, and one in Clacton-on-Sea where they're doing the same thing, they're building 60. So, it's very fashionable now for people to downsize older people back into town centres.
Well, that's actually another form of social housing and impact investing. It's all well and good living in the middle of nowhere, but you get to a point where actually you want people with a similar
I think
experience.
the other thing, Tony, is you're releasing a family home.
Bingo.
So that's good. That's good for the country as a whole as well.
There's been a kind of move towards obviously trying to promote the high street by encouraging councils not to charge parking, for example, and that's showing a shift in that direction, I guess.
I think the government are doing what they realise the problem, and hence the town grants and so on that they've made available to towns and cities. There's a huge amount of money being pumped into towns and cities across the UK.
But there are a lot of councils who are being a little bit too greedy on the parking side.
Oh, yes.
And they're
Still,
really
you think,
torpedoing. Yeah. That's because obviously that's in their domain as opposed to government's domain.
Well, interestingly, in the little town near me, you can now get half an hour free parking with your 10p fee on Ringo.
That's bigger than.
Yeah, but the annual pass has doubled, more than doubled. So if you're a resident without parking...
Yeah, that's interesting.
That is the problem with the parking is it's not in tune with how things are changing, because it's in tune with dash to the shops, buy a product and come out. It's not in tune with going for an experience.
Yeah.
And the last thing you want is if you're going out with your family and you're eating, to hurry up your conversation thinking, oh, right, 1 minute 59, someone's going to
put a £50
Yeah.
fine. A friend, but just feel sorry for this friend of mine, if you would. He's got 150 car parks across the UK, and his business he had, during the lockdown, he had 10% occupancy of those car parks, and it's only gone up to 35% now. So it just shows you how things are changing.
Yeah, that's very true. For the better.
You could argue because you're driving less. Yeah, true.
High streets, we're talking about in a very positive way. Is there a knock-on impact on those city centres, those big town centres where people aren't going to work?
Well, the changes if you look at Oxford Street, for example, the changes in there are quite dramatic. They're pedestrianising, they're going to make 2 pedestrian plazas there. But what we're seeing is that, the Topshop, flagship stores are going, and it's all this product, not people buying stuff. It's experiencing stuff. And it's also, London is a global city. When you go in a hotel anywhere in the world, you see above reception clocks. They'll say London, Tokyo, Paris. London is a global city. So in those central locations like Oxford Street, all the major brands, people are looking online and all of that.
It's like a flagship stores, aren't they? Really?
Exactly. They want a flagship storeroom. And so central London, I think, will always be vibrant for that reason.
What's going to happen, though, in towns where the big Debenhams has gone, for example? What do you do with a 3-storey vast space that's pretty soulless in the middle of a town?
Well, I'm glad you've asked us that, because we're all experts in that field, one way or other, from funding right through to developing and letting them. I mean, most of the big stores, they're too big. And they're going to be split down, perhaps residential above the first floor and potentially commercial on the ground. The biggest problem with the Debenham stores is they're very, very deep. So you can't get light into the middle of the building. So you've got to do a light well of some sort, atrium of some sort, which is very expensive to do. And in some cases, they're probably better to be knocked down and start again.
It goes on to the point you mentioned earlier about you thought that the malls would stick around as much. But every mall I've walked through in smaller towns, they're half empty.
We've got too many malls. I'm talking about the major
big
ones.
mates
the real
in
smart
London.
ones.
I
got offered a shopping centre. I got offered a shopping centre the other day for a third of what it cost to refurbish it 7 years ago. Just to refurbish it, a third. And it was a quarter let, a third let and paying the rent, a third they call soft rents, not paying the full rent, and a third vacant. But of course, as the owner, you're paying the empty rates. And to maintain it and run the shopping centre was $950,000 a year.
Okie doke, all right then. I think that's all we've got time for now. But I think it's not as doom-laden for the high street as maybe the headlines might suggest. Hopefully plenty for you to take away. Thanks so much for joining us. Until next time, bye-bye.